भद्रं कर्णेभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ तत्सत्.
Okay, thank you everyone. As everyone has been mentioning, these are the two books or scriptures, you can say, that really form the ground for not only me, but for many of us, for our spiritual life and our spiritual practice. I would say the two most important books, and there's a sense in which they shouldn't really be thought of as something two different things, separate things. Swami Paramesanandaji, who was a disciple of the Holy Mother, used to humorously say to some of the boys, you know that there's a modern Bengali translation of Gita, and they would say, oh really, what is it? And he would say, Ramakrishna Kotamrita. So this is how much he thought that the words and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna echoed the words and teachings of Sri Krishna in Gita. And Thakur himself so many times identified himself. He who was Krishna, he who was Rama, is now Sri Ramakrishna. That we can really feel that these are kind of companion books. It's very interesting to see how they work together. Sri Ramakrishna himself, we don't know how much he knew of Gita, how much he knew of any of the scriptures. My feeling is that he was far more well-versed in the scriptures than we realize. And Gita especially, I am convinced that he was very familiar with Gita. He must have heard it so many times when he was young. Sri Ramakrishna was not a fool. He used to call himself Morkha. He used to pretend that he says, look at me, I'm just an illiterate fool. But he grew up in a highly cultured tradition. He could do puja from a young age. That means that he knew quite a bit of Sanskrit, even though we know that his mind wasn't attracted to that type of study. He used to say, when the pundits would come, when the pundits came from outside of Bengal, they wouldn't know English in those days, these traditional pundits. If they came from different parts of India, they would converse in Sanskrit. And Sri Ramakrishna used to say that I could follow everything. I could understand what they said. I couldn't speak in Sanskrit. He didn't know all of the grammatical rules and everything, but he had that much of a knowledge. And we know with the Gita that several times he would refer to different verses, particularly whenever any great artist or poet or writer, anyone would come, he would refer to the verse that says, whenever we see any manifestation of greatness, we know the special manifestation of God is there. Yad yad vibhutimat satvam. So he was very familiar with Gita, I'm sure. It wasn't his habit to quote verses like the pundits and the scholars do. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't very familiar with all of these things. Now, before we really start, I would like to just give us a little perspective. Just talk a little bit about the role of Gita and what it means from a historical point of view. Sometimes we read that the Gita represents the essence of the teachings of Vedanta and Vedas, what we find in the Upanishads. that we'll find on the Gita is kind of a summation, samagra, some compilation of the main teachings from the Upanishads. This is true to a certain extent, but there's so many elements that are found in Gita that come from various other traditions that aren't found in the Upanishads. We know this. We don't, so many things we don't find in the Upanishads. We don't find a very strong tradition of bhakti. We have just a limited amount of Sankhya philosophy. There is talk of gunas and things like that. Mostly we have this impersonal absolute. So there's not too much of God with form or personal God or worship, puja, karma yoga. We don't find all of these things, which become very prominent in Gita. So the Gita, it serves a special role on, we can say, on two different fronts. One is because it's smriti, because it's not shruti, that the specific purpose for the smriti texts was they're the scripture for the people. They're for the common person. Therefore, the Upanishads really, if we want to be very strict about it, these were for the Brahmins and for the males, and even we can almost say for the sannyasis, and taught mostly the path of knowledge. And one of the theories is that out of compassion for everybody else, which is, of course, the vast majority of people, that Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the Puranas, all of these other texts were composed in order that everyone would get the same knowledge that was restricted before. This adhikaravad was restricted before, which means that everyone could get liberation. So this is a very liberal text. The Gita had opened up everything, and everyone was, the teachings were available to everyone. And the emphasis was no longer on the Brahminical class. It was no longer on the sannyasin. It was really more for the householder. So some of these distinctions seem to disappear a little bit, not simply for the jnani, for the bhakta. And we get a beautiful harmony of the four yogas, of the personal and impersonal aspects of God. The Sankhya philosophy is brought in, Bhakti yoga is brought in, this something that's called the Bhagavata tradition. There's a theory among many scholars, and I also think it makes a lot of sense. And they say generally 5,000 years old. 5,000 years old. You ask a modern day scholar, and he'll say it's probably the 12th century, something like that. Now, they're looking at it from a scholarly point of view. When was that finished product of the Bhagavata Purana? And why, if it was earlier, it's not cited by anybody. Ramanuja, Madhva, they would have cited. So this is a distinction that overlooks the fact that it may have its final ultimate, what we find as the Purana much later, but the ideas and the beautiful poetry of it and the tradition of Krishna and Radha and all of that, it may be as old as the Upanishads. This is one theory, the Bhagavata tradition, that side by side, when the handful of pandits and the Brahmins and the scholars and everything were studying Upanishads and doing all of that, the general people had this devotional tradition, and through poetry, oral tradition, and everything. So nothing was really written down till much later. So this Gita brings in this Bhagavata tradition, this devotional tradition, and of course, one of the most important elements that comes into the whole Vedantic tradition that we don't find in the Upanishads is the idea of the avatar. So for this first session, I want to really concentrate on this idea and what we find in Gita and what we find in the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. Now we'll find that Sri Ramakrishna has his own unique way of explaining things and understanding things that may not be very traditional. First of all, the idea of the avatar is also not a very uniform tradition. The way it's explained in Gita is not the way that it's explained in the Puranas. In Gita, in every age, yuge yuge, one will come. In the Puranas, we have 10. And then the Bhagavata Purana, it will say sometimes there 10 know that there are 24, and then it will say asankhya. It'll be innumerable avatars. So we have all different ways of looking at it and understanding it. So I'm going to start with these 3 verses that are probably the most commonly recited, memorized, and chanted in the verses from the Upanishads, from the 4th chapter. Ajopi san vyayatma bhutanam ishwaropi san parakriyam swam adhisthaya sambhavam yatmamayaya yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam swarajam yaham paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma samsthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. Okay, now it starts out Ajopi, even though I'm unborn, and that I am the undecaying, the inexhaustible self of all beings and the Lord of all beings, that somehow I'm able to rest on my true nature, but at the same time create something more from myself, and through my own maya, I'm able to be born. That means in a human form. So this is what Sri Krishna is saying, that you see me in human form. In my real nature, I am one with the Ishvara. I'm one with the personal God, Ishvara, who is also not different from Brahman. So the infinite absolute reality, but I'm able to cover somehow, the Avarana Shakti, cover that impersonal aspect and be born in a human form. Now, when does it happen? Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharat. So whenever the dharma is on the decline and the adharma, abhyutanam adharmasya, when adharma is on the increase, then I project myself forward somehow. So we have what we can call a historical imperative for the avatar, according to this theory. And if we look back at history, we can say at least, of course, some of the avatars will have to say or legendary. Some of them, of course, are not even humans. If we look at the Puranic idea, when we get to Sri Krishna, at least, then we have, of course, dharma is at stake. This is the number one example that we have. But in more modern times, if we look at the birth of Buddha, this was a period when what Swamiji used to call priestcraft, when they were losing the spirit of things and the power too much in the priests, and that religion became too ritualistic, then Buddha was born. Then if we go to Shankaracharya, this was also a time when there was a little bit of degeneration of religion. It was the fag end of the Buddhist tradition and everything. He came to reestablish the tradition. Chaitanya Deva, there was also a period of degradation, and it was during the Mughal rule at that time. And then with Sri Ramakrishna, particularly in Kolkata, where his ministry was, particularly there, that people were filled with Western ideas, and there was a real disinclination to accept for a lot of traditional ideas, Hindu tradition and Hindu modes of worship. So we can see some truth in that. Now, Sri Ramakrishna didn't emphasize that very much. In fact, he used to say that the real purpose of the avatar is not because of adharma, but it's to teach bhakti. How will people learn if they don't see God himself coming in that form? So this was one of his ideas with regard to that. And then again, this paritrana et cetera. So in order to protect the good people, and in order to get rid of the people who are against dharma, then he comes to re-establish the samstapana, to re-establish dharma in every age. So that means that it's not limited to any period, not limited to any number, anything like that. Now, when we look at the period when Sri Ramakrishna was born, I find it very interesting that many of the ideas that we assume everybody followed and believed in were not universally believed at that time. The degree to which the British had influenced thought was something incredible. And part of it, I would say, is also because many of those who came to Sri Ramakrishna were members of the Brahmo Samaj. And the Brahmo Samaj didn't care for these ideas. So when we see Narendra, okay, Narendra comes to Sri Ramakrishna. He doesn't believe in this avatar business. He doesn't believe. Really questioned very much the idea of rebirth and samskaras. I was so shocked when I first understood that. I thought that this was just universally accepted by everybody. And then I realized that the British influence was so strong, and that the Brahmos also were influenced by that, at that time it really wasn't. And it took a long time before the recorder of the gospel, and Swamiji himself, to start to understand. And they had their own way of really understanding what was meant by the avatar. Now, part of it with Swamiji, we can say part of it was he was a jnani. We can say part of it was he liked this Upanishadic idea. And to be fair, the Brahmos also, not that they just made up stuff, they also liked this idea from the Upanishads. That, and even in Gita we read that the Lord dwells equally within all beings. Yeah? So Swamiji used to say, then how do we say that one is the avatar and the other is different? God is dwelling equally within all beings. Now we'll see how Sri Ramakrishna will answer all of these things. But so this was one objection that they had in those days. And Swamiji, as I say, had his own way of understanding these things. I want to read something, just a couple of different things from, again, from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. This will be towards the end when he's having conversations with Dr. Sharkar. Now, Mahindralal Sharkar, he was also a highly scientific person. Not that he was so much influenced by Western ideas or by the Brahmo Samaj, but he considered himself an intellectual. So he also didn't like this idea of the avatar. God dwells equally within all beings. Many of them had the same arguments. Trailokya Sanyal even wrote a little book about it. And they would say that God is infinite. Can infinity be broken up into parts? Can it dwell within? They all have these different arguments like that. Now, we'll see how we can get around it. Anyhow, Swamiji, of course, just Narendra at that time, he's trying to explain to Dr. Sharkar how the devotees looked upon Sri Ramakrishna. He said, we think of him as a person who was like God. See, he doesn't want to go too far. Do you know, sir, what it is like? There's a point between the vegetable creation and the animal creation where it is very difficult to determine whether a particular thing is a vegetable or an animal. Likewise, there is a stage between the man world and the God world where it is extremely hard to say whether a person is a man or God. So not going too much into the theology of it. There are ways of understanding the avatar that don't involve this Puranic idea that God is up there in a heaven, in Vaikuntha or wherever, and looking down on the earth and seeing that there's too much dharma, and decides, let me take the human form in a particular form, and then we don't know, is God no longer up there, that he sits down here? We don't know. This is we can take this as an allegory if we like. We don't have to take this too literally. We'll find that there are other ways of understanding these things. Now, Sri Ramakrishna himself, he knew that many of the devotees like these types of of the explanations. So he would very often speak in those terms. This is also from the Gospel. Thakur speaking. The ego of a divine incarnation and other great souls. So now he's not going to make a very strong quantitative distinction between the avatar and the Ishvara Koti and the Jiva Koti. He uses this language. The Ishvara Kotis, they'll be companions of the avatars. They'll be like them in many ways, with lesser power, and they come along with the avatar. Like a planet that when it circles the sun, it'll have different moons that go around it. They'll come along with it. So he says, take the case of a man who stands by a wall, on both sides of which there are meadows stretching to infinity. If there is a hole in the wall, through it he can see everything on the other side. If the hole is a big one, he can even pass through it. The ego of the incarnation and his companions is like the wall with the hole. Though they remain on this side of the wall, still they can see the endless meadow on the other side. That is to say, though they have a human body, they are always united with God. Again, if they will, they can pass through the hole to the other side and remain in samadhi. And if the hole is big enough, they can go through it and come back again. That is to say, though established in samadhi, they can again descend to the worldly plane. Now, it's very interesting because the avatar is both the hole in the wall through which we see the infinite absolute, and also the one who can go back and forth. It's a very interesting combination of two slightly different ideas. Then, let me see. Anything else to read? Okay. Now, this is another quote, but I'm gonna hold off for just a second, and I want to go through a few of these different ideas. Now, one, we can say if we want to be jnanis, Sri Ramakrishna used to say the avatar is for the bhakta, not for the jnani. He comes for the sake of the bhakta, or that the bhakta is the one who can accept it. Sometimes he says that the jnani doesn't believe in the avatar. Now, maybe in the Puranic sense, but in the sense we're going to talk about it, the jnani can easily have tremendous faith, because we can look at the avatar just as we're waves on the ocean. This is a huge tidal wave, gigantic wave, so that there comes a time when a quantitative distinction leads to a qualitative distinction. Quantitative distinction leads to a qualitative distinction. If we think, for example, of the water, that it'll get colder and colder and colder. It'll still remain in the same form till it reaches a turning point where if it goes below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, then it becomes ice. So then that quantitative distinction turns into qualitative distinction, and it goes higher. The same thing will happen when it hits the boiling point and turns into vapor, like that. So there's a point in which a wave is so huge that we have to describe it differently, and where we see the power of the whole ocean in that wave. And this is one way of understanding the avatar. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he had this theory. I'm going to call it the Adhar theory. Adhar is a term that he liked to use very much. It means a receptacle or a container. And sometimes he would use it very literally, that he would refer to Naren. He would say that there's a huge cistern, jala, that's used for bath water. You can fill the whole thing up. You can have water for several days, a great big thing. And there are others that are little pitchers, and other things, little cups. All of them are containers. All of them can hold water, but they hold different amounts. Now, for Sri Ramakrishna, there were several distinctions with regard to who is a Jiva Koti, an Ishvara Koti, or an avatar, based on this idea of Adha. Now, in the case of the avatar, this ability to hold spiritual moods, spiritual emotions, different levels of samadhi, were so different that, as he said before, they can remain for long periods in nirvikalpa samadhi and come back down again. Or even these emotions of mahabhava. I read an interesting thing the other day. I'm sure I've read it many times because it's in the Great Master, which I've read, of course, different times, but it didn't register before. We always hear Sri Ramakrishna say that if an ordinary person goes into nirvikalpa samadhi, that the mind will get merged in Brahman and the body will fall off in 21 days. Right? We're all familiar with that. But according to Swami Sharadananda, he also said if a jivakoti experiences any of these high devotional moods, mahabhava, also they won't be able to keep the body. He says within 21 days, if they go into that type of bhava, mahabhava, that they also won't be able to keep the body. And he would give so many examples. He said when these divine moods come, and we're not ready for it. It's like an elephant going into a small straw hut. It'll just a bull in a China shop, huh? It'll just destroy everything. And then sometimes he would say that if an elephant goes to a small pond, how the water will splash and it'll be half empty and everything, but goes into a very large lake, then we hardly notice anything. Huh? So we have this distinction that the spiritual experiences and realizations and moods and levels and depth of samadhi are one test, and the highest of these, of course, is reserved only for the avatar. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, very often he'll say that only the Ishvara Kotis and the avatars can come back from nirvikalpa samadhi. Right? We've heard him say that. Now, this is not to contradict him, but there's another very interesting thing that I read recently, and just to show how none of this is written in stone. Thakur himself would understand things in different ways at different times and explain things in different ways. And this idea of adhar, that means that there's not a strict cutoff point. Look at the difference between the Swamiji. He's much closer to the avatar than he is to some of the other Ishvarakotis. If we want to make a little scale, and of course they were all great souls. They were all so far above us that it doesn't make sense to do it. But even Sri Ramakrishna, he would do that. He would say that Narendra has so many spiritual attributes and qualities and everything. Anyhow, this. If I can find it. Okay. Swami Sharadananda, he's saying that there are different stages. I'm reading from the Bengali, so I'm just going to translate it. There are different stages and degrees, even with regard to going into nirvikalpa samadhi. This is an astounding statement, because nirvikalpa samadhi is nirvikalpa. How can there be any degrees with regard to if there's no vritti, if the mind is, how can there be any? And yet we find sometimes Sri Ramakrishna goes into a very deep state of samadhi, takes a long time to come down, sometimes otherwise. So he said there are different stages. And if one is established in the highest type of knowledge, then his identity can completely merge in Brahman. And he says the jiva or the Ishvara Koti is not possible for them to come back from that stage. So what this means is that even among these Ishvara Kotis, that is a very rare thing. If they really get deeply established in nirvikalpa samadhi, even for them it's difficult. So he's trying to make the argument that the avatar is so far above even Narendra and Raja Maharaj and all of the others. And then he says, the reason is that they can remain, he says, they can return temporarily and remain on the savikalpa state. And anyhow, he goes on like that. And yet Thakur did designate, he designated the six we know as these Ishvara Kotis, companions. Here again, in the early days, it looks like Bhavanath was considered one, at least in Nityasiddha, and somehow he got bumped, and Purna becomes the sixth one. Now, I'm mentioning a lot of this because we start out with this idea that Ajopi son of Yayatma, that the avatara is unborn, and we get the feeling that the avatara is a Nitya Siddha. Nitya Siddha. Now, Thakur uses this expression. What does he mean? Ever perfect. In the same section that I read, somebody was asking this Swami Sharanand. Okay, I'll read it in Bengali just for fun. Ishwara koti mani ei jonme tara bishesh odhikar niye esechen. So in this birth, they've come with some very special powers and qualifications and everything. Purbo jonme tini bhaddha chilen ki na se bishoy nischoi kore bole jay na. We can't say with certainty whether they were like this in previous births. So what does this mean? That what can one become a Nitya Siddha, and can one become an Ishvara Koti? So according to Swami Sharananda, this may be possible. So now we're getting to a whole different level that we don't have to really believe in some idea that God himself comes down in human form, but that there are different souls that are born, that either they're born that way or through many births, they develop tremendous spiritual power. The spiritual power we've seen comes in the form of realization. It comes in the form of spiritual practice that we don't find any other example in the entire religious history of the world of anyone who did anything close to the spiritual practices in terms of variety and intensity and everything that Sri Ramakrishna did. He did in 12 years what would be many, many lifetimes for many different people. In 12 years, in so many different traditions, so many different ways, so many different gurus, having the highest realization of all of them. So this is the second thing. One is realizations, one is spiritual practice, then this ability to transmit spirituality. He could do it in a glance and a touch. Just look at the Kalpatarude, that all he had to do was say, Chaitanya Hok, and raise his hand, and they all went to had different spiritual experiences. So again, whether we say he was an avatar or whether we say he was a Adhikarika Purusha, and I'll get to that, someone who through many lifetimes is born with some tremendous, fantastic power, huge tidal wave, that we have to give him a different name and everything, that becomes a little bit irrelevant because we see that it's a fact, however we explain it. And Swamiji often said, don't give too much importance to this. Let people understand the way they want to, but understand it's a fact that he came with his tremendous spiritual power. So these are three things: transmitting power, spiritual practice, and spiritual realization. Then what else can we say? That this is spiritual power that we find manifest in Sri Ramakrishna. These are the main things, I think. Of course, we can say that that tremendous love that he had, the selflessness, so many other things. So, Adhikarika Purusha. Now, let me go back to this idea. This is something that we find in the introduction to the great master. Again, Swami Sharanand. Swami Sharanand, he had a very rational, scientific type of mind. And what he does here, he tries to explain how the concept of the avatar came. It's something we don't find in the Upanishads and in the Vedas. Swami Vivekananda says we find it in germ form, some of these things, but certainly not in any well-defined manner. It's simply not there. Swami Sharadan, he says, look at some of these ideas from the Sankhya school. Now they have this idea of what they call this adhikarika purush, that purusha, that an individual will achieve that highest state of realization. Many of them will, but there'll be a very rare one that will not, at the fall of the body, will not become merged in Brahman. And merged in Brahman means that's the end. That means that the drop of water has gone back into the ocean, that the salt dal has melted in the ocean. There's no bringing it back. He says there'll be a few like that, something like the Bodhisattva ideal in Buddhism, that will maintain some desire to bring others to liberation, or there'll be some trick of the Divine Mother, however we understand it, so that they don't get merged forever in that infinite absolute Brahman, never to come back from that state. We have the allegorical story that Ramakrishna tells of the four friends who were walking down a path outside, and there's a high wall on the side of the road that they can't see over. They would have to climb up if they want to see what's on the other side. And they hear loud music and singing and laughing and gaiety and so many different things. And one by one, they become curious. They climb up. The first one climbs up and he looks over, and that power of attraction to go to the other side is so great that he forgets everything and jumps over. So second friend, third friend, they do the same thing. The fourth friend, when he goes up, he feels that same pull to go over, and yet he has some type of inner strain and some special desire for the welfare of others. And he says, no, let me go back and tell others about the great joy that's on the other side so that they can experience that themselves. I'll wait myself. Now, this is what Swami Sharadananda says. This is the one who will later be known as the avatar. And he gives an interesting explanation, I think from Sankhya again, that on the fall of the body, such a person becomes prakriti lina. The others become brahmalina. That means they're merged in Brahman and they're gone. That there's no coming back from that state. Prakriti lina means that they'll remain merged in nature in such a way that the subtle body still can be reunited somehow with the Atman. However we understand that they can remain perhaps in a state where they can be helpful to the world even without a body. Remember Swamiji said, it's good that I get out of this body, to spit it out, to take it off a worn out cloth, but I won't cease working, even from that state, until everyone knows that realizes their oneness with Brahman. So even from that state, that they could come back, but that they can take human birth again, because the subtle body has been merged in Prakriti, so they can remanifest itself. Just as the universe at the end of creation becomes merged in this avyakta state, pralaya, and can again take vyakta state afterwards, so they can also come back down from that state. This makes sense when we think about Thakur's vision of Swamiji. That Thakur had that vision that he's traveling to some distant realm, and he goes beyond all of the gods and the goddesses, and he reaches a state where everything is an infinite, absolute, formless reality, and that he takes the form of a small child, and he sees that these sages are there in nirvikalpa samadhi, lost in samadhi, and this little child goes up to one of them and sits on his lap and puts his arms around him and gently awakens him from his nirvikalpa samadhi, and he says, I'm going back down there, you also have to come. And then he goes, and then he sees that a light comes from the sage Nara, that we hear later, that goes all the way down to Shimla, the neighborhood where Swamiji was born. And when Thakur sees him, he recognizes him. And when he asks him questions, he puts Swamiji in that state where Swamiji is not aware of anything but can answer questions. He asks him about his past and why he's come and all of that. And he gives all of the same answers and the right answers. So this would be a case where Swamiji Prakriti Lena. And yet at the command of Sri Ramakrishna, we have that hymn, Paratatve Sadalina, that even though he's ever merged in this highest reality, Ramakrishna Samagyaya, through the command of Sri Ramakrishna, Dharma Samstapanataya, and no, how does it go? That anyhow, he'll come down and take birth, human birth, at the command of Sri Ramakrishna. So this is a very nice scientific way for us to understand it, and it fits in with the worldview of the Jnani also. Okay, we still have some time. Now I want to read something else. This idea of the avatar. Now, Sri Ramakrishna at some point started to understand. Many people have this question. Is the avatar always aware of his divinity? Is he always aware that he is an avatar? Now, Sri Ramakrishna stressed this idea that the avatar is born with the human body and the human mind, and that there's a veil of Maya, that will be there, and that it'll get shaken off relatively easily. Sometimes they have to do, of course, far more with regard to tapasya and with regard to sadhana than anybody else, but still, gradually this feeling that yes, they're not like other people, they're born with a certain mission. And in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he seemed to have some type of, I don't know if we want to call it memory, but some type of sense of identification with earlier avatars. Now, with regard to Rama and Krishna, this, again, we don't know if they were historical, we don't know anything about that. Chaitanya Deva, it makes more sense. He was far more recent, and Sri Ramakrishna felt identified. I don't feel the need to have to rationalize or explain how Sri Ramakrishna can make some of these statements. I'll give one other example with the Holy Mother. When the Holy Mother is in Rameshwaram and she makes that statement, when she sees the Shiva Lingam, she says, it's just as it was when I made it. So people say, oh, she remembered when she was Sita and when she did it. I don't think we have to take things so very literally. I think we can also understand at that time her mind was so identified with Sita that you could have that type of. So there, and my point is there are different ways of understanding it, and there are also limits to the extent to which we can understand these things, and we have to accept that. We have to accept the fact that these are very difficult things. I think it was Swamiji who said that it's easier to understand the real nature of this infinite absolute Brahman than it is to understand the birth of the avatar. Because there's something that requires some leap of faith almost in order to understand the avatar. Now, with Sri Ramakrishna, when the Brahmani, Bhairavi Brahmani, when she came to Dakshineshwar and saw Sri Ramakrishna and understood that everybody else thought that he was going through a state of divine madness. And she said, no, that I'm convinced that what you're going through, these are all signs of, they thought it was ordinary madness. He said, these are signs of divine madness. So they thought it was some physical or mental malady that he had. They recognized that he was a wonderful, very spiritual soul and this and that, and felt sorry that he had these problems, this burning sensation and sleeplessness, so many different things that are not found ordinarily, and most people don't know about these things. This Brahmani was well versed in many different fields. She was highly unusual for someone. First of all, she was a worshiper of Raghuvir, as Thakur was. She used to carry a thing around her neck, a Raghuvir. Secondly, she was an expert in tantric sadhana and tantric philosophy, but she also was an expert in all of the bhakti scriptures from the Gaudiya Vaishnava school. And Rupa and Sanatan Goswami, they wrote extensively about these different bhavas and rasas, these different moods and different physical symptoms that we're seeing, signs that we're seeing when Radha would go into these highest states of Mahabhava. There were 19 or something different things, and blood coming out of the pores and burning sensation and sleeplessness and unable to eat, so many different things. And she said, I see all of these in the body of Sri Ramakrishna. You assemble all of these great pundits who are familiar with these scriptures, and I will prove to them that Sri Ramakrishna, because he has all of the signs that we see both in Radha and in Chaitanya Deva, that he is an avatar. So she tried to do it very scientifically, and she got some of the greatest pundits of the day. And after hearing from her, she was so persuasive, and after seeing him, they all agreed. Then one of them came late. Who was it? Was it Vaishnacharan? I think. One of them came late, and he said, oh, is that what you say? This is far too small. That he's that source from which all of the avatars came. Now, this is some idea we find in the Bhagavata Purana, that when it lists all of the different avatars, it doesn't list Krishna. He's not considered, according to them, to the Bhagavata, as an avatar. He's the avatarin. It says, Krishna tu Bhagavan Swayam. So we have all of these manifestations, but Krishna is the Lord himself. So from that point of view, they're not even manifestations of Vishnu or Narayan. They're avatars of Krishna himself. But Krishna is something beyond all of them. So this, I think it was Vaishnav Charan. So he's the one that said, oh, your estimation is too low. So he's identifying him with the avatarin, with the Ishvara himself, something like that. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, before that, did he think of himself as an avatar? Doesn't seem like he was interested in that question, that it even arose in his mind. He was so intent on having the vision of the Divine Mother and going through all of his other spiritual sadhanas and everything. But then he looked at it in a very dispassionate, disinterested type of way. He's sitting there and he says, oh, did he say that? Oh, but he said this, and oh, interesting and everything. And then gradually he also started to feel that, and it became kind of the conviction with him. Now, when the other disciples started to come, we see different waves. At one point, the Pandits came. And after the Pandits, the Brahmos came. The Brahmos, as I say, didn't like this idea of avatar. They were too egalitarian. Yes, same divine presence in everyone. They had this funny theory, and not just them. Dr. Sharkar had it. Vidyasagar also had it. That if you say that there's greater power in one person than another, then God can be accused of partiality. Vaishamya dosha. They would use this term. Vaishamya dosha. You mean to say that God gave one person more than another? That means he's partial to one, and God can't be partial. Thakur would say, what a strange idea that is. Don't you see? It's just a very obvious thing how the one person can barely do anything himself. Another person, you can get 20 people to attack him and he can drive them all off. And then he would say with Vidyasagar, why do people come to see you? Have you grown two horns on your head? He said, no, you have such a greater degree of compassion, of learning, of wisdom and everything. That's why they come. So he used to think that was a very silly type of argument. So for Thakur, there was a distinction between presence of God and Shakti. He would say Shakti Vishesh. There's a distinction in power. And he would say with the Jnani, that there are different types of Jnanis. They all have the same knowledge, but they don't have the same power. And for some, he would say it's like driftwood, that this driftwood, it can float and it can even cross the river. But even if a little bird sits on it, it'll sink. And then you have someone else who's a great steamship. Thousands of people can come and cross to the other side on it. Now, the concept is the same, something floating on the water, but Shakti Vishesh, there's a difference in the degree of spiritual power. Now, this is all adding up to something which I think is very important. It's another little Bengali thing. I hate to say it, but some of the most beautiful things we have in our literature are still only in Bengali and not fully translated. And this is why I'm so grateful that I took the time to be able to at least read some of the Bengali things. This is from a lecture that was given by Swami Bhuteshanandaji. Some of you who are coming from our Washington Center know that I've gone through this before and that I like this very much. He's talking about, he says that after a long time, the Western educated disciples came to Sri Ramakrishna, and among them, there were many very high-class people, and some of them started calling Sri Ramakrishna an avatar. So this will be the ones who did it mostly were Girish Ghosh, and Ramchandra Datta. These were the two that pushed this idea more than anybody. Others also believed it, but they were very vocal about it. And so Thakur, it says, Thakur tate birokti bodh korechen. He wasn't flattered by it. He would be a little bit annoyed. Who are these people always going this avatar, all of this? And he said one day, he said, Keo doctor, keo theater kore, or bole avatar. One is a doctor, and the other simply works in the theater. And they're calling me an avatar. And he says, Koto age, boro ponditara avatar boriges. How much earlier so many real great pundits called me an avatar. They had some idea, but do these other people even have any concept of what it means to be the avatar? He says, if that, so if that was applicable then, is how much more applicable it is to us. See, Girish and Ramchandra, they at least saw him. They visibly saw him. We haven't seen Thakur. So for us to say that, yes, I know what it means to be an avatar. He was definitely an avatar. I know that God decided to come in human form, and he came as Thakur. So he says, Amra avatar ki buchi. What do we understand of what it means to be the avatar? Yeah, and then he says, Thakur himself said, Vishwa Brahmander Niyanta Jini. He who is the master of this whole universe. Tini Manusher Bhitor Choddo Poe Manus Rupe Avatirno Hon. That he came in just in this small human body. Kota ki kalpana kora jai. Can we even imagine? Even just try to imagine all of this. Ke Vishwash Korbi. Who will really be able to believe all of these things? Then he goes on, but the important part for me, if I can find it, is Sri Ramakrishna e bishoye ta sposhto nirdesh diye gaye. So he very clearly explained he didn't want this, and Swamiji also. That Swamiji said, "What is your concept? That you want to have the picture of Thakur and just wave incense and flowers, and that's the beginning and the end of it." He didn't want that. He came. Why did he come? Tini bolechen, chance toiri hoy roilo, nijo nijo jibanke keo chance dheli gorene. He said, I've come that just as we will take gold, and we'll melt that gold, and we'll pour it into a chanch, into a what's the English word? Mold. Pour it into a mold. This is why he came. That we should look upon him as an ideal. This is the whole thing. She adorsher bitor koto chitro. How much variety there is. That means we pour the gold into this chanch, into this mold, and it'll come out in so many different ways. But all of them will be a gold ornament. We'll get to this a little bit later. Thakur's idea of how this infinite absolute can manifest in different forms that way. So what's necessary for us is that we recognize, however we look upon what we call the avatar. We can be very honest with ourselves and say, I don't really understand how this happens, but I see that someone has come. Actually, two people came, Sri Ramakrishna and the Holy Mother. We can't really look upon them as anything separate, that they came and they were here for a few minutes and then left. Thakur used to say, that, these bowels. These bowels are these very unorthodox, mystical bands of almost gypsy-like devotees. They can be Shaktas, they can be Vaishnavas, they can even be Musufis. They don't make any caste distinction, and they like to sing and dance, and sometimes they'll just show up. And you'll see them, they'll show up and they'll have their little instruments, this ektara, they'll ding, 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 and they'll sing and they'll dance. You don't know where they came from, and then you turn around, they're gone, you don't know where they went. So Thakur used to say that he came with his band of minstrels. He came with his small little group, his direct disciples. They sang and danced for a few minutes, and then they left. And then everyone is left shaking their heads. Who were they? Who were these people? Where did they come from? We can't really have any clear understanding, except that we know that they were something fantastic. And we can have absolute faith that if we follow their adarsha, we take this ideal, this spiritual ideal, and we can mold ourselves according to that ideal, that our lives will become blessed. This is enough. So this is the point that I wanted to make. And now I turn everything over for questions. See, there's so many different ideas that we could discuss with regard to Gita and the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. But I thought really the greatest contribution that Gita makes to the tradition that before that was really the Upanishadic tradition is this idea of the avatar, because this becomes the dominant form of worship throughout India. Not that there aren't the great devotees of Shiva or Durga and everything, but this the worship of Rama and worship of Krishna became so important. And this idea of the avatar, that I thought that I would start with this. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and turn it over to questions.
Maharaj,
Yes.
the name I think is Gaudi Pandit.
Maybe, okay. Gaudi Pandit.
Atmajnanananda and Gaudi Pandit. He came later and said, who says he was an avatar? He was God himself.
Yes.
Same.
Avatarin. He uses this, yeah. He's the source of all avatars. Yeah. Gaudi Pandit. Okay. Don't be shy. Don't hesitate. If it's something that's not 100% related to this, that's also okay. Any questions?
Maharaj,
Yes.
this is not to dispute anything. I just wanted to understand.
No dispute. That's fine. I like disputes.
But when you were explaining Adhikarik Purusha,
Yeah.
and then you gave the example of Swami Vivekananda being one of those sages way above this world. Did you give that example to say that was an illustration of Swami Vivekananda being an Adhikari Purusha, or you
Yes.
wanted to see he was avatar himself?
No, that even the Ishvara Koti will fall in that category. And anyone who attains realization, even short of that, Thakur says that there are some people who can come back down from samadhi because they keep a little desire to help other people. So I look at the bodhisattva idea within the Buddhist tradition. That would also be a case where they've done everything necessary for them to have their Mahanirvana and to get out of this round of birth and death. But because they have some little desire to help others, they can be born again. So that in between period, the subtle body will have to remain in some state that they can take another human body, even though normally what they say is that physical body goes back to the different senses, subtle body and everything will also go back to, everything will merge back in the cosmic mind. There won't be anything left. But the merging in Prakriti rather than Brahman allows that to come back. So all of the Ishvara Kotis would also be these Adhikarika Purushas. Only the avatar will have a greater spiritual power. And the idea is that the others come along with it. Now, can somebody become an Ishvara Koti? This question was asked of Mahapurush Maharaj. Somebody asked him about the Ishvara Koti, and he said, "Why do you ask me? Am I an Ishvara Koti?" And then he said, "But by Thakur's grace, I may become one." That means that if and when Thakur comes again, that he'll also come again. Look at Ras Bihari Maharaj, Swami Arupananda. There's a beautiful conversation in the Gospel of Holy Mother where he's saying, "Mother, I don't want to be born again." And she said, "I'm sorry, my child. When I come again, you'll have to come again with me." So that means, yes, that from that point of view, that he's become a companion of an incarnation in Ishvara Koti. So just as maybe some can become Nitya Siddhas, we generally think Nitya Siddha means they were ever perfect, but it can also mean that they attained perfection, and yet they'll be able to come back as a perfected soul. Oh, now let me mention one of the very, very important point that I forgot. All of this theory about just being a bigger wave than other things, this isn't the whole of the idea. One very, very important idea of the Ishvara of the avatar and the Ishvara Koti is that they are not born because of past karma and because of samskaras and because they haven't achieved the goal. This is the normal, what we normally take for the impetus for the jiva to take another human body is that it's the force of their past karma. So with them, it has nothing to do with this past karma that way, that they've already attained perfection. So this will be, of course, a clearer distinction, not just a bigger way and a smaller way, a clearer distinction between the avatar and the jiva koti, or the Ishvara Koti and the three of them. But my whole point was this all falls under the category of theology and not philosophy. What's the distinction? Theology will be some type of doctrine, and it doesn't have to be 100% logical, and we can argue about it. There can be all different theological theories. Thakur, he made a big distinction, even between philosophical theories. For him, and we'll get to this later, for him, these were also just different points of view. For him, truth was realization. So we can understand how different people will have different theological explanations and different types of understanding of what this concept of the avatar is and what the reality of the avatar is. But this is one important feature, of course, that they're not born because of the past karma, that they're born only because of a desire to work for the welfare of others, or because of the need to reestablish dharma, something like that. We have that beautiful hymn that Vitaritum avatiram jnana bhakti prashanti. That why was Thakur born? He was born just to distribute his knowledge, wisdom, and peace. Jnana bhakti prashanti. Vitaritum avatirnam. He was born just for that purpose. Nothing with dharma and adharma. that just to spread it around so that everyone will be able to have access. He used to say, if the avatar doesn't come, who will have faith in these things? We read about God realization, we read about the highest knowledge, knowledge of Brahman, all of these things in the old books. Unless we see someone has really done it, then we won't have that faith, and it should be something more recent. Thakur used to say the coins in the period of the Nawabs. You can't buy anything with them today. You need some modern currency. So in every age, they come with some new type of message. And Sri Ramakrishna, of course, his message was the most universal and the most complete, and contained all of the different aspects of worship and everything. So Swamiji, who was such a skeptic in the beginning, not only did he accept Thakur's avatar, but Avatar Varishta, the greatest of all avatars. We wonder sometimes that the same avatar coming each time, and that why will Swamiji be so sectarian? But what could he do? This was his faith, his belief, his experience. He saw with his own eyes this the tremendous depth that he saw in Thakur, the tremendous understanding and spiritual power. Now Swamiji, with his tremendous, how much strength of mind and concentration he had, and Thakur just had to just touch him casually, and he loses all. And he said, I made up my mind. Next time I see this madman, I won't let him play his tricks on me again. I'll be very cautious. And how long did it last? 2 seconds. Sometimes Thakur would just touch him with his foot, or touch him on the chest, and everything would change. So what else could Swamiji conclude? That we don't know what to call him. He said, God-man. I see a man, is he God? We don't know what to call him. We have to give him a different name. He's so different from everybody else, and it's such a wonderful thing. So to answer your question, that this idea of Swamiji, we don't have to take it as Thakur calling him an avatar. This will also be the same case for the Ishvara Koti, or companion avatar.
So, Pranam Swamiji, this is Gita.
Hi Gita. Hi Gita.
Yeah. So, Swamiji, then how does God decide whether he should come like Rama and Krishna? They were born in rich families, so they could spread the message far and wide. I think, I'm not sure, but if my question is correct, but I'm just thinking, on what basis do they take these decisions, where to be born, how, in what circumstances to be born, and what type of message, in what circumstances to spread, things like that. Because I think even nowadays, maybe we don't know, we may have an avatar somewhere. Because this is
yeah, no, I understand. This is what I was saying, that we have so many different ways of understanding this. If we look at Gita, then it's kind of a historical imperative. It's a historical need of the time that it will happen. Not that the God has to wait and think, is this the proper time? Is this and that? It'll be some almost Hegelian or Marxian idea that with the dialectic of history will ensure that some change will come and that someone will be born. Some type of idea like that. The other idea is more of a Puranic idea, that Narayana and Lakshmi are up in heaven and at Vaikuntha, and they're talking to each other, and my Dev is in trouble, I better go down. That type of idea. That's not part of my way of looking at it. My way of looking at it is that somehow this is just something which takes place. And why they're born, where they're born, in the family they're born, we can understand it from a certain point of view. Now, another element of the avatar that I wanted to mention, I'm glad you brought this up, is Leela. That it seems to be the case that they're born in just the right place, just the right time, with just the right cast of characters around them. Yeah. That seems like it's pre-planned somehow. I'm not saying it is pre-planned, but we get that feeling that it's pre-planned that way. Now, Thakur was born, if we want to take a guess, he had to be born in a village because he had to have that purity of mind, that simplicity and everything. It had to be close enough to Calcutta so he could go there because that's where the need was greatest. It had to be that particular time when all of these young men were studying all these Western things, and they were all friends in the Brahmo Samaj. And how could there be so many great souls born at the same time in history? And Thakur bring them all with him. These are all types of speculation. They're just fun. We can't come to any definite conclusion, any of these things. Some will find satisfying, and that's good. Others will just say, we don't know. It's impossible to really understand.
Thank you, Swami.
Maharaj, when you were mentioning that avatars don't take birth, or Ishvara Kotis don't take birth because of their karma, or they haven't realized something, is that in that sense in 4. In the 6th verse, Krishna is saying Ajopi San and Abhyayatma. Is it in that sense? Birthless and deathless?
I think there what he's trying to say is that, Arjuna, you're looking at me as a human being. That understand that I've taken this human form now, but other than that, I'm one with the Ishvara. I think this is the point that he's trying to make here. Now, when we say that they don't have any karma, do they not have any samskaras? This is another interesting thing. I would say that they're born with samskaras, very pure and holy ones, of course. But if they've had previous lifetimes, even though they've been perfect in a previous lifetime, there'll have to be some type of samskaras there, and some tendencies and talents and skills and things like that. So these are all very strange and mysterious things. Just to give another example, Sri Ramakrishna says a couple of times, it may be that I'll have to be born again. Maybe in 150 years, or he gives different time periods and everything. Now, what does it mean? If he's an avatar, he'll have to be born again many, many times, over and over again. So to me, he's making a slight distinction that this Sri Ramakrishna subtle body and samskaras and memory and everything may still be present in the next incarnation. Otherwise, I don't know how to understand it exactly. When we talk about the avatar, very often we say the mystery of the avatar. So we just have to accept that fact that we're entering into a realm where our logic is not enough. Thakur used to give the example, you're trying to pour 5 seers of milk into a 1 seer container. It can't be done. It'll just keep flowing over and over and over. You can't do it.
And that samskaras thing, it could be that they have taken it upon themselves by free will, or it could be the remnants of something that needed to be, or something that was needed at that time.
I think it's really what they say Swamiji. If Swamiji really, if he'll be born again, that he'll be born with that same spirit of fearlessness and strength and all of that. That's become part and parcel of the personality of Swamiji, which is the sum of his samskaras. So I take it in a very practical sense. Just as we come with our samskaras, that even they would come with these samskaras, but not with this karma that has not been burned up. All the karma gets burned up for those who attain the ultimate liberation, or at least key to liberation. So not with that type of karma, which is forcing the new birth, but still with personality traits and tendencies and things like that. Because they're all so different, all of the direct disciples. And Thakur not only did accept this idea of samskaras, but he identified them with the different deities, or different. Some is born as belongs to the realm of the Divine Mother. Some of the element of Radha, some of the element of Krishna, Radha, all different things. So he had his own way of understanding how they had their samskaric nature somehow. So, Sushmita, shall we wrap it up? Anyone else? I'm happy to stay if there are any more questions. It's now we've gone over.
Adhikarika Purusha, is that same as Vijnani or that's a different classification?
Okay, Vijnani. I think I'll try to get to this later. This is one of the ideas. It seems that unless one is an Ishvara Koti, one cannot be a Vijnani, but there are lots of loopholes and exceptions and things like that. So I have, again, all these different theories about that. If we climb up the ladder and we peek over, but we don't jump over the roof, and we can come back down again, we can be sort of like the Vijnani. So sometimes Thakur will say this is for the Vijnani alone, or he'll say that this is for the Ishvara Koti alone. Other times he'll talk about anybody. After God realization, you'll live with the right ego. So he leaves the door open for slightly different interpretations also.
Maharaj, I have a couple of small questions if you have time. One of them is, you said the Bhagavata, it is considered was finished around 1200 AD, and you believe that that's when it was done, the completed form, but it is perhaps as old as Upanishads. How do you know that?
There are much earlier references to Radha and Krishna and everything. In the Bhagavata, we don't even find the name of Radha, but we find references to these stories that form part of the Bhagavata. So we know this tradition of Sri Krishna as Govinda in Vrindavan and everything. We know that it's earlier than the Bhagavata Purana, and how they know exactly, partly because of Gita, partly because we have these beautiful ideas about devotion. Where did they come from? Was it something completely new, or did it represent an earlier tradition? Scholars will have their own ways of trying to reference early things, early poetry and things. I don't know exactly, but it makes sense that we can't imagine that 99% of the people, whatever it was, would have no spiritual life. They were forbidden from studying Upanishads, from even hearing about it and everything. And so it's a very nice idea. They'll be able to give better evidence than I can, of course. But
Maharaj, the other question was, you say that in the gospel you see that M did not believe in reincarnation. In which context do you see that clearly?
Mostly, yeah, I'll tell you, mostly in terms of some scholars, that when he said that he didn't have much faith in the idea of some scholars, yes, Thakur, will that be harmful for me if I don't believe it? What he's really saying is that to not believe in some scholars means that to not have much faith in the previous birth.
All right. Yeah.
That in that context mainly. And then after a while, after the first few months, he says, yes, that I have to accept it. I think he's talking about Adhar, that how he is a good samskaras, or Ishan, one of them. And he says, yes, now I have to accept that idea. So he didn't have much faith also in the avatar. Most of the Brahmos didn't. They didn't like that idea. I think he may even one time that asked, will it be harmful if I don't know if he says Punarjanma, but definitely says about samskaras. So I think that
he does.
That's the connection. Yeah.
You mentioned a book by Trailokya.
Yes. Sanyal. He was the songwriter for the Brahmo Samaj.
Yeah.
When you get to the some of the final chapters of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, they're discussing that book.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he actually comes himself, and Girish is there, and they start grilling him. And then he starts giving me these arguments. He says, oh, even he, Thakur, even he says God dwells within all beings and that the Shakti is infinite. How can that be parts? Same argument that Swami used to use. That's why I say it's probably a Brahma argument. So we see from that, even though he had tremendous respect and love for Ramakrishna,
Yes.
and Thakur also had great love for him. And he was influenced greatly by him. All of the songs that he composed at the end were greatly influenced by Thakur. Thakur introduced this idea of worshiping God his mother into the Brahma Samaj, and this idea of spiritual fervor. Amaidema Pagu Kore, that was one of
Yes,
Thakur's favorite songs that he wrote. Oh, mother, make me mad with thy love. He wouldn't have written that before meeting Sri Ramakrishna. They were much tamer than all of that.
Your belief, if I understood, I just wanted to verify. How do the avatars know that they are avatara? Did I understand you correctly as saying that this is not a question so easily understood, and
Yeah.
let it be?
Yeah, we hear that some that from their very birth they know their divine nature, and yet with the Sri Ramakrishna's case, it didn't seem to be anything that really stuck in his mind too much. Now, the other thing we have to understand is that in village India, people had such simple faith that they would see a small boy, a small child or something and think, oh, God has come in this form, that they'll even worship and make special offerings. So there were some in Thakur's own Kamarpakur
Yeah.
who
They-
worshipped him that way and everything. So maybe a little of that idea is in Thakur's mind, but didn't really stick with him that way and everything. So in his case, maybe after he developed that understanding and conviction, maybe it awakened some memory and then he realized that he always knew it. We don't, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. To me, it doesn't take anything away or add anything to him. If he knew it from his birth or he discovered it later, makes no difference. Huh?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
And it was more whenever somebody will talk about that somebody said that Sri Ramakrishna is avatar or something, and he will say, oh, what did he say? What did he say? Like that he will ask. And then at the end, he will always come up with, oh, I don't have any ego. I don't have anything.
Yeah.
So repeatedly, I
तो किछु जाने ना. I don't know anything.
He bole Maharaj always like so many times, repeated times, like, oh, ki bole, what is he saying about me?
Yeah.
Oh, but I don't know anything. I don't have any aham, and I don't have all this. He repeatedly he will bring that question, Maharaj.
Amita dash anu dash. Reno. I am the dust of your feet.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he would sometimes ask people, "What do you think of me?"
Yeah.
And they see this young boy, even he can recognize. He calls me an avatar. He was impressed, so he would do it not to feel flattered, but to see how much insight they had, what type of pure mind they had to be able to recognize his spiritual greatness. So he would look at it from that point of view also. So shall we close then? Anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay. Then, Kadir, you want to do a chant at the end? Anybody want to sing anything or do something?
I can do a chant.
Okay.
Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhina Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhag Bhave Sarvastaratu Durgani Sarvo Bhadrani Pashyatu सर्वः सद्बुद्धिमाप्नोतु सर्वः सर्वत्र नन्दतु दुर्जनः सज्जनो भूयात् सज्जनः शान्तिमाप्नुयात् शान्तो मुच्येत बन्धेभ्यो मुक्तश्चान्यान् विमोचयेत् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः
Pranam
Okay.
Maharaj. Pranam.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So we'll meet again same time tomorrow night.
Yes.
Yes, Maharaj.